So today we are going to start with pivot table. Um, and in order to start and understand what is a pivot table and why do we use it and how do we use it and all the functions, features of this object in Excel application, we have to go through some of the concepts that are required for us to understand uh, data, right? So when we have that level of understanding of data, we will be able to understand exactly what to do with pivot tables, right? So let's talk about data. Okay, so data um, in a different point of view can be categorized into two types. Okay, so one is dimensions, the other one is numeric, right? Let me put it here. Okay, so what is a dimension, right? Dimension is a categorical column or ordinal column. Okay, why do we say ordinal? Why do we say categorical? So if there is a data point which can be categorized into some point, okay, for example, country name, city name, object name, item name, sales location, okay, all of this can be considered as a dimension, right? So it is something that is similar to mathematical geometry, right? So x, y, and z axis are called dimensions, right? Three dimensions, right? In data, we can have n number of dimensions, and these dimensions are basically categorical variables, right? So we have categorical and then we have ordinal dimensions. Categorical dimensions are um, data points that are known as categories of data or categories of certain data point. Ordinal is exactly similar to categorical with one distinct difference that they have an order, right? For example, um, first division, second division, third division, right? So obviously we all know that first division is greater than second division based on the percentage of your results, right? So anything which is non-numeric can be considered as a dimension in very, very simple terms, right? This is not a complete definition, but this is as close as it gets, right? On the other hand, numeric can be date, it could be integers, it could be floating points, it could be uh, anything which has numbers in it, right? Not in combination with text, only numbers, right? Anything which can be considered as a number can be considered as numeric data, right? Now, why do we need to know about these two types of data segmentation? Because pivot table uses this segmentation in order to showcase data, right? So if you have dimensions, you can segment the data based on dimensions, and then you can use a numeric computation or calculation to show the numbers. For example, averages, max, min, or standard deviation, variance, or count, right? All of these are very typically used in terms of data analysis, right? Now that we know what is the two types of segmentation of the data, right, we will understand what is a pivot table. Pivot table is an object in Excel which helps you to slice and dice the data in a format that is very easy to understand and it's very intuitive to use. Okay, now before we jump to the actual pivot table, let's go into understanding what kind of data do we have. Okay, and then I will give you insights into how do we create the pivot table, how do we understand different components of the pivot table, and then some of the use cases. Okay, so let's jump right in. Let me maximize this. So I have 9 columns of data, segment, country, and so on. And then I have 700 rows of data, right? It's sufficiently large so that you will understand the easiness on how you can actually go through or navigate through data and understand it a little bit better, right? So in order to let's first understand the data. So we have segment, which is um, this is sales data, and the first column is segment. So what kind of channel or market you are dealing with, that's the segment column. In what country you are selling your product, it's the column B. What product are you selling, it's column C. How many units have been sold in that for that particular product in that country is column D. What is the price for manufacturing the product in that particular country, right? What is the sale price? How much of the total sales has happened? So that will be a unit sold multiplied by sales price, right? So whether we have this data on whether we have sales column or not, you will have this data from column F and column D. What is the total profit that we have achieved through the sales, right? And on what date this entire thing happened, right? Don't quote me on the validity of the numbers because this is dummy data, right? Now, um, in order to create a pivot table, you have to go to the insert tab, okay, and you have to click on pivot, which is the first option in this version of Excel. Now, when you create the pivot table, you will have a dialog box which will have two options. So one is what data do you want to choose in order to create the pivot table. So you can either choose a table or a range so that that data becomes your base of the pivot table, or you can use an external source for which you have to connect to that source and get the data from a database, from CSV, or from any other Excel file. And then you want to also mention where do you want this pivot table to appear, whether it will be in the new worksheet or an existing worksheet, right? Let's say I want this in a new worksheet and I click on OK. Let me rearrange the sheet and I will rename this sheet to pivot table. Okay, now pivot table in general, you will see that there is a small area where you can see a box which says pivot table number 3, and in order to build the report you have to choose different fields from the pivot table field list, which is on the right hand side. So by default this area will appear on the right hand side so that you can choose the field names and drag them in one of the 4 boxes here so that you can achieve the result in an efficient manner. Right? On the top, you will see the contextual tabs, which are pivot table analyze and design. So anything related to pivot table, like options, features, and everything, you will find them in these two tabs. Okay, now let's go through pivot table fields first. So there are in total 5 boxes. One box contains the list of all the columns that you have in the data. One is the filter box. If you drag and drop, let's say any of the dimensions. So remember, now we know that what is a dimension and what is numeric fields, right? So field filters, okay, so filters box is considered to be a box which is specifically meant for dimensions so that you can filter the data based on different dimensions and different values of those dimensions, right? So when I put segment here, I can see that this appeared here. Let me zoom in. Okay, and the segment column has all the values selected currently, and you will immediately see that there are 5 unique values in this segment, and you can choose to select one or multiple of such values, right? So filter works in this way, correct? So segment and country, let me put these into filter current for now. Okay, rows and columns are again specifically meant for dimensional columns where you have non-numeric data. Okay, so let me put product here. Okay, and you would see that we have 6 different types of products in all the segments in all the countries, right? Now you can get the feeling and understanding on what is actually happening, right? Now let's take one use case. I want to know per product what is the total sales, right? So I have the sales here. I can put it into values. Okay, values box is meant for numeric columns, right? And when I say numeric columns, I mean the columns that actually make sense when we calculate on them. For example, if I have a data set which has employee IDs which are numeric in nature, for example, 1001 is an employee ID, 1002 is an employee ID. However, if I add these two employee IDs, the resulting number will not make sense. That means these number, even though they appear as numbers, they are actually textual values, right? So those kind of data points are again considered as either dimension or neutral data points. So that means this box, which is known as values, is meant for numeric columns only that make sense when you calculate on them. Okay. However, there is an exception that I can put in any kind of column here, whether it is numeric or non-numeric. The only exception is that for non-numeric columns, the calculation that will make sense is count, right? So you can count, for example, per segment, I want to know how many countries are available, right? So I can put it into values and it will show me the count. Max, min, or average will not make sense when you put a dimension column or a non-numeric column in values. Okay, with that information, I can see the data here. So in the row labels or in the rows, I have products. Okay, let's see what will happen if I shift the products into columns instead of rows. And you would see this is exactly same as a row, but in column format, right? So all the values of the dimension column will appear in the columns instead of rows. So depending on your use case, you can choose to have your dimensions in rows or columns, right? The best use case or the industry practice is you will put dimension columns in rows when you have a sufficiently large number of unique values. If you have 3, 4, 5, maximum, let's say 10 different values, you can choose to put it in columns. We will see an example shortly. Okay, now I can put date here as well. And you would see for each product, I can distinctly see what is the sales for each of these years. Right, so now I have a point where I can say that okay, for almost every product 2013 sales are very less, 2014 sales are sufficiently more. I can choose it like this and you will see the reason for it, right? So this is one analysis that I'm trying to make, why 2013 shows lesser numbers compared to 2014, okay, by a very large margin. And the reason is for 2013 I have only 4 months of data versus in 2014 I have all of the months. right? So naturally, I have 1/3 of the data, and based on that, the values are lesser for 2013. Right? So this is just a very basic example of what you can do with pivots, and this was the explanation of what is pivot table fields.